Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Paul Mason with Pacific Forest Trust, and I just want to take my 60 seconds to talk a little bit about forests and how in some ways some of the real opportunities there seem to be slipping through the cracks between different programs. Forests are our largest and most expandable area that will actually sequester carbon out of the atmosphere, so it's a place where we really need to invest to get where we want to go. In CAL FIRE's programs, as the director had noted, they have their Forest Legacy program, which is only $4 or $5 million in the current budget, which really doesn't go very far. And they've really focused that in areas sort of under imminent threat of conversion. DFW has money for wetlands and watershed restoration, where we could really focus more on those areas, the more rural areas where money goes a lot farther and you can make a bigger impact on how watersheds function. There's a disconnect between the programs, and frankly, there's just not nearly enough money, especially since there seems to be more of an emphasis on wetlands than on a more holistic watershed approach. So we'd really urge a little more holistic approach.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Louis Brown on behalf of the California Biodiesel Alliance. We are working with biofuel producers in the state of California with a lion's share of the new revenue coming from fuels under the cap. We believe there's a strong nexus between that and biofuel production, drop-in fuel replacements produced right here in California. Yet, while we carry and bring forth the lion's share of benefits with the low carbon fuel standard, most of that fuel is being imported today. The biodiesel industry example, we produced 30 million gallons of biodiesel. We have the capability of producing 60. We imported 140 million gallons of biodiesel last year in the state of California. We believe we can maximize our benefits by increasing in-state production. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
Madam Chair, members, Mark Fenstermaker on behalf of Audubon, California, just like to associate ourselves with the comments from the Nature Conservancy and others in support of additional funding for natural resources projects.
Thank you.
Nick Lapis with Californians Against Waste. First of all, I'd like to associate myself with Bill McGavran and his comments on the multiple coalition proposal. We were part of that. I did want to make a couple very quick points on waste issues. They've sort of flown under the radar, but if you look at the administration's letter to the legislature that came out last week on the GGRF funding so far, the CalRecycle programs have been the two most oversubscribed programs and the two most cost-effective programs. And even that is based on very conservative estimates where they don't look at a lot of the benefits from the projects, and they only look at a 10-year life for the project, even though once you build a digester, it's not going to go anywhere after the 10th year. So even under the most conservative estimates compared to other agencies, they still come out the most cost efficient. If there's more money available, we think it's a great opportunity to invest more. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Carrie Timmer. I am the Government Affairs Director for the Sierra Business Council. A couple of very quick overarching comments. One is we definitely support investment, future investment and more investment in natural resources. Secondly, though, we're hoping for a broader distribution of funds across the state in the future. I think this is especially important to build support for the post-2020 goals. A couple of possible ideas for how we can achieve this. One might be a geographic set-aside, similar to what's been done for the disadvantaged communities. This is especially important in areas without MPOs, largely the Sierra. Secondly is looking at the value of resources from an area along with the population to help evaluate projects. And third is developing a more robust mechanism for valuing the co-benefits and then prioritizing projects that not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions but achieve multiple benefits. SBC commits to bringing shovel-ready projects forward for future funding pots and vetting these and other ideas as part of the investment plan update process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last.
My name is Kimberly Chen. I'm here on behalf of the California Pan-Ethnic Health Network. I'd like to echo the comments of my colleagues from the SB 535 Coalition and emphasize the need to ensure that projects targeting disadvantaged communities are showing benefits to those communities. And finally, asking for an increase in the active transportation program. In Cycle 1, over nearly 800 million shovel-ready projects were left unfunded, and we just asked for that consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we're moving on to Part B, which is the oversight hearing on high-speed rail. Please, I'd like to see Lou Thompson, High-Speed Rail Peer Review Group, Anthony Simbol, Deputy Legislative Analyst for this issue, and Jeff Morales, of course, CEO from the High-Speed Rail Authority, and Jackie Thompson. Jackie, did I pronounce that correctly? JC, all right, from the Department of Finance. All right, there are proposed discussion items. First, I'll go to the LAO.
Sure, Anthony Simbol with the Legislative Analyst Office.
1 second.
Okay.
And what we're interested in narrowing our focus on the update on the initial construction segment funding, legal challenges, and oversight. So let's be real focused. All right. We
wanna
may lose
cover-
Senator Pavley. It's not that she doesn't want to listen. She has to make a plane.
Being on the Transportation
Yes.
Committee for the last 12 years, I've had how many hearings on the high-speed rail?
Indeed.
So, anyway.
Did you want to cover each issue one by one,
No, altogether.
all together? Okay.
And then Senator Nielsen and I, when you're all finished, we'll ask questions, I'm sure. Welcome.
The first issue is an update on the initial construction segment, like you mentioned. As you know, this segment runs from Madera to Bakersfield. It's estimated to cost about $5.9 billion for the construction. As your agenda notes, the authority has broken up this segment into different construction packages with an estimated completion date of by December 2018. In order to meet that deadline, there are various sort of non-construction activities that the authority must meet. This includes environmental review, obtaining necessary permits from state and federal agencies, entering the necessary third-party agreements, such as with railroads, and acquiring the necessary land that's needed for the project. Page 6 of your agenda provides a good summary of where they are in those activities. Because of the need to complete these activities in order for construction to finish, we think it's important for the legislature to provide oversight to make sure that the authority is doing what it needs to do to meet these various activities so the completion date is on time. As your agenda notes, we have 2 recommendations regarding this to help facilitate legislative oversight. The first is for the authority to provide benchmarks for each of these activities. For example, for a particular construction package, when does it need to have 50% of all the land that's needed, by what date? And so for them to establish these benchmarks, and then for the second recommendation is for them to provide you periodic updates on where they are in meeting those benchmarks. And rather than require a new report, we recommend just adding on to their existing project update report that they provide the legislature every 6 months. The second issue you have that you wanted me to talk about has to do with a funding update for the initial operating segment. This would extend 300 miles from Merced to San Fernando Valley, the initial operation, which will begin in 2022. According to the High Speed Rail Authority's business plan last year, it's estimated to cost about $31 billion. The report also identified a need for additional $21 billion that they needed to come up with to fund the $31 billion costs. While the cap and trade revenues that are being dedicated on a continuous appropriation to this project will help meet that need, it's unclear whether that's going to be enough. And it could be unlikely that's not enough money. So what we had recommended last year was for you to get a complete funding plan from the authority on how they expect to use the cap and trade, what are the estimates on how much cap and trade money is actually going to be available in the future years, are they going to, what additional funding is going to meet the remaining gap. So that's something we had recommended last year too. On the legal issues, I'll defer to the authority to provide you an update. And in terms of oversight, again, I think your agenda lays out different options, and I think you want to consider those options, but you also want to consider the existing oversight we have and how you might want to improve it rather than create, for example, reporting requirements rather than create additional. You may want to look at the existing ones. Some reports may no longer be necessary, or may you want to expand on that. But I think in order to ensure the project is achieved in the timeline laid out by the authority, you're going to want periodic updates. So you, the legislature, can figure out, well, are there ways we need to step in? Do we need to provide more resources for project management rather than hearing it after the fact? So I'll stop there.
And the benchmark issue is something that you've raised before.
Correct, but in our most recent report, we laid out more specific details about that.
I appreciate that. All right, then let's move on to, well, the peer review group first. Lou Thompson. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator. I first apologize for not having acquired the ability to speak at 180 words a minute, but I will do my best on this. The peer review group, as you may know, is a group created in AB 3034 to advise the legislature. We are not paid. We are compensated for expenses. And we review reports and other documents of the authority, plus other things that we think are important, and then we give you reports from time to time. I have prepared a written statement for this record, which I've given to your staff in case anyone is interested, and I'll summarize it as quickly as I can and answer your questions in the process. I don't need to belabor the point that this is a massive project. And I don't need to belabor the point that the state has an intense interest in overseeing it. It's the largest project ever undertaken by the state. And if any project were ever subjected to oversight, this is certainly one that should be. We see a need for 3 levels of oversight. The first level is the High-Speed Rail Authority's internal oversight. We discussed this with them in detail on the February the 24th meeting, and we believe that what they have in place should work. We would like to see more experience with it to see that it is working, but as far as we can see now, it's what should be there. We believe there should be a focused oversight function with continuity and a time frame that permits this project to be overseen not just year to year, because it is not a 1-year project or a yearly project. It's a 10 or a 15-year project. There should be a staff that's capable of taking that view and seeing it over that period of time. The LAO would be a good place for such a function, but there may be others. I don't know where the right place is, but that certainly should be a candidate. Then there should be a legislative oversight of this project, possibly a select committee or a directed subcommittee or some other function, but it should be a committee that views it over a multi-year time frame, not just year to year, but over multi-years. Continuity is crucial in overseeing it. Now, there is a dilemma here, and that is that good oversight needs a summarization of a massive amount of information. That is, there are different levels, and the level at which you're overseeing it, you need actually quite summary information. In fact, it would be dangerous to get too deeply in the details. You don't need to do that. We met with the High-Speed Rail Authority, as I said, on the 24th of February to discuss what those oversight metrics might be, the summary metrics might be. We suggested that they be broken between short-term metrics, such things as right-of-ways, project contingency, spending rate, and especially an ARRA spending rate, since that money evaporates on September 30th, 2017, if it is not spent. These would be what we call, or what are called dashboard indicators. They're not numbers. They are indicators that tell you generally, is it green, yellow, or red? If it's green, we don't worry about it. If it's red, we better do something about it. And yellow gets the process started. There should be some long-term dashboard kind of indicators as well that gives you a sense of what are we learning and what is that telling us about the project, and is it what does that tell us about the segments of the project and how they might change from what we've learned. Most of these can be readily developed from the project update reports, and that they already have business plans, and indeed a number of them are already in place, and we note that. At the same time, we would strongly recommend that you ask the High-Speed Rail Authority to review all of their reporting responsibilities and simplify them. Too much information that sometimes can be as bad as not enough. And too many reports actually cost time, and they can conflict, and they actually may yield no benefit at all. So it would be worthwhile to ask them to review and give you a recommendation as to things that can be combined or simplified. Finally, we would be happy to continue to work with the High-Speed Rail Authority on a summarized list that suit your needs, and that would be improved with some feedback from you as you see how the process is going as what you think you need. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the clarity of that presentation. I appreciate that very much. We'll have questions as soon as we're through with everyone. Senator, does that work? All right. Let's have Jeff Morales, of course. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair and Senator Nelson. Very quickly, I just want to talk about progress, and then I'll go through the questions. It's very important to note our program is fully underway statewide. In the north, we're beginning with the Caltrain electrification project, 150-year-old diesel commuter line that will now be electric. Our construction in the Central Valley is underway and will be expanding rapidly in the coming weeks and months, and then sustained over several years. I do want to point out, in the context of the GHG discussions, we have a program in place to ensure that we have zero net emissions during construction, which is a pretty massive commitment for any project. That will, and Senator, in some of the questions of pre-2020 reductions, that will help produce pre-2020 reductions, which we estimate at somewhere between almost 300,000 to 700,000 tons of reductions. Clear, tangible benefits, specifically in the Central Valley, where the work is underway. Simultaneously, we are moving forward with environmental clearance on remaining sections and proceeding with investments in the so-called bookends. I also want to point out, as the ARB noted in its report, that 100% of our funding this year, cap and trade funding, is going into disadvantaged communities on that. With regard to your questions, you asked about our major potential delays and the risks associated. We have a comprehensive risk management program into place. It's really industry. It's at the forefront of what's being done in the field to identify and manage risks. As far as the construction element, certainly right-of-way we have identified as a challenge and a risk to our schedule and cost, and we are actively managing that. You asked about the ARRA funding, and Lou Thompson mentioned that as well. We have $2.2 billion worth of ARRA funding. To date, we have expended about $500 million of that. And so what we're looking at is approximately $1.7 billion between now and September of 2017. We monitor and project forward on a continuing basis with the Federal Railroad Administration, and our latest estimates show that we expect to expend those funds by June of 2016, so well before the deadline, and I can talk more about some of the steps that we're taking to get there. You asked if we had, on the right-of-way question, whether we have enough parcels to begin construction. Again, we have begun construction, and so the short answer is yes. The longer answer is we have approximately 520 parcels that have to be acquired as part of the initial construction, the contract underway. As of today, we have 256 contracts signed for those parcels, and we've delivered about 140 of those parcels to the contractor, and that's what they're using to move forward with construction. All the parcels are in the process of being acquired. First offers have been made, so now they're moving through the pipeline and will be delivered to the contractor in order to keep the program moving forward and on schedule. There's a question about the burn rate, the amount of money we will have to spend. I would just say it's a little difficult to compare our program to a typical project, in part because of the length of it. Our first two contracts cover almost 100 miles, and so that's where the ARRA funding will be going. Over that 100 miles, we will have essentially the equivalent of, half a dozen to a dozen what would be typical projects going on simultaneously, because work can proceed in multiple areas. So while I would never say I'm comfortable with almost anything we're doing, I'm confident that we'll be able to achieve that rate. For comparison, I would point down the block. Over the next 2 years, the arena and the associated construction here in Sacramento are going to spend close to something on the order of $600 million in a square block. So again, I think for comparison purposes, we can certainly see how we will be able to do that.
I'm not sure you should compare it to the...
There may be other issues, but just from a construction perspective.
People don't like that arena.
Yes.
A lot of people.
Fair enough. On the railroad agreements, we have reached agreement with the union. We have two major railroads that we have to reach agreements with, the Union Pacific and the Burlington BNSF. And those agreements all relate to how we interact with them in terms of adjacency to their operations, acquisition in some cases of parcels, and ensuring that our mutual operations can be conducted safely and efficiently. We've reached all of the agreements with the Union Pacific and are just finalizing now the acquisition of properties with them. And we are underway with the BNSF and expect to have those agreements concluded in the next few months. So we're moving forward very well on those. The funding, in terms of identifying the funding gap, we have the requirement to provide a business plan to the legislature every 2 years. The next one will be in 2016. That will include the update of the funding plan and the financing options. As part of that, a key part of that analysis will be getting as good an understanding as we can of what the cap and trade revenues are coming in at and what they look like going forward, so that we can understand how we can best use those and put those to most effective use. In terms of being able to use it, cap and trade as a financing tool, the biggest key there is at this point time. Seeing several auctions come in, seeing how stable the proceeds are. We are in constant discussions with private entities who are interested in the program and being a part of it, and potentially looking at the availability of cap and trade to finance. And they are looking for that stability in the revenues coming in. And so as we see the revenues come in from several successive auctions, we'll be able to determine if, in fact, we can then move forward with it as financing. Legal challenges. We have resolved the major legal challenges, which revolved around the initial 1A funding. We do have pending CEQA litigation. 7 lawsuits were filed in the Central Valley. We have settled 2 of those. We're in discussions with the remaining parties who have filed. We have a case pending regarding some of the compliance with some of the issues in 1A that is not scheduled for trial. We're working with the court on those. And then lastly, yes, on the oversight question, I would certainly concur with the comments that have been made in terms of the need for oversight, the importance of it, but also making sure we're doing the right sort of oversight and providing you and the public with the right sort of information. Our oversight begins within the authority, with the board. We have an independent board that includes appointees of the legislature, and a finance and audit committee of the board we've worked with them to develop some dashboard metrics that we are now putting out monthly, and they're available to the public to look at, to monitor key elements that Mr. Thompson spoke to. We have an internal audit function. We also have oversight from the Federal Railroad Administration. The peer review group is an important element of oversight to provide information back to the legislature. And then in terms of the metrics, again, we have developed a series of metrics which have been provided to your staff. These are typical metrics that are used in construction projects, dealing with cost, schedule, other key metrics that will show where we are in the program, provide useful information on a summary basis.
All right. Thank you. Then there'll be some questions, but let's finish up with finance.
Sure. As far as the vacancies that currently exist, the Transportation Agency is taking the lead on that process, and agency has reached out to the various entities that currently have vacancies and is working to ensure that those positions don't remain vacant for an extended period.
Yeah, that's an issue with the peer review group as well.
Right.
Okay. All right. Questions, Jim? And then I'll go.
What is the actual number of miles in this first build out? Is 80 to 130 I've heard, but what are we talking about?
It's the Central Valley section is approximately 130 miles. Right now we have the first section under contract is 29 miles.
39 miles?
29, sorry. And then we have not yet executed the contract for the next section, which is 65 miles. So we have a total of 94 right now that are either actually under contract or about to be under contract, and we're in the process of procuring the balance.
That's Madera to Bakersfield, or where?
Madera to just north of Bakersfield, yes. Right.
Okay. I'm going to jump around here a little bit. One of the things we talked about earlier in the hearing is the vicissitudes of this cap and trade money, and you're counting heavily on that revenue stream, right? 20%, and somebody's talking about getting up to 30% for the high-speed rail. Is that right?
25% is what was provided
25?
Going forward on an annual basis, right?
Well, do you look at that in the long-term build-out as money you can count on for 20 years or 30 years?
We're looking at a number of different scenarios, depending on what level that comes in at. Obviously, what we know, we've got 25%. We don't know what that equates to on a dollar basis. So we are running and evaluating different scenarios on different assumptions and how we would then effectively use the funds going forward.
What is the plan for, let's say, maturity of the whole system that would pick up the Bay Area into Los Angeles? You know, this is just a small little piece of California that doesn't have much population comparatively in terms of high numbers on the rail. So how long will it take to build out, and ever how many miles do you expect would be ultimate on it?
What's called the Phase 1 system, and that was designated in Proposition 1A from San Francisco to Los Angeles, is 520 miles. Our current plans show completion in 2028. For that, okay. We are working to accelerate that, but also to deliver segments of that before that, and then it ultimately gets tied together. And so we could conceivably have, and we're looking at the possibility of separate segments. So for instance, the San Francisco to San Jose would be up and running before that independently, the Central Valley section in Southern California, and then they get knitted together over time.
There's been resistance from some of the urban areas, Silicon Valley, for example. How are you going to plan to serve those areas that don't want you?
I think you're referring to some of the early concerns on the peninsula, the lower end of the peninsula, were over the initial plans for what was called the full build option of full 4-track elevated structure. There was strong opposition to that. The legislature, we modified our plans, and the legislature captured that. And so what we are moving forward now is a system within the existing right-of-way of the existing commuter line there, dramatically reducing the impact, delivering it much faster and at far less cost, and achieving the same operational characteristics.
Allow me to regress a minute in terms of the funding. So you're not now just totally counting on cap and trade. You're looking at other sources. Would that be bond funds, or what other sources would be available? Private investors are going to put any money into this?
Yes, we have identified sources of funding. We have a total of $3.3 billion in federal money today. We have the Prop 1A bonds, and currently there's about $4 billion of that is not committed to a particular section right now. And we have the cap and trade funds. Other tools that are available, there is a federal loan program specifically for railroad development that we are evaluating. And yes, private investment absolutely will be a key element of the program as we go forward.
Okay, let me talk a moment about revenue. What are your projections on the revenue stream to retire all this debt? It's only going to hail from passenger travel, is that correct? You're not hauling any freight?
Correct. We retire the debt in terms, the bonds, are you referring to? Yeah, the bonds are general obligation bonds. And that was as written into the law. So our requirements and the way we're designing the system is to ensure that on an operating basis, there's no subsidy of the system. That's a mandate in Prop 1A, and that's what we're modeling the system to do. And in our business plan, we lay out in pretty great detail what those revenues look like compared to our operating costs, what that produces in terms of net cash flow, and how that can then generate financing opportunities in private
I apologize, I have not read the business plan. But enlighten me. So the expectation in your business plan is passenger revenue will pay this, keep this thing going. Is that correct? Pay all construction costs, all build-out costs, and keep it going?
Not the capital costs. Again, cover the operating costs. There's, I'm not aware of any there are very few places anywhere in the world where the capital costs of infrastructure for any transportation is paid back. That's a public investment typically.